is a 1997 Volkswagen EuroVan, and it's pretty neat. That's because this one has a camper conversion done by Winnebago. So it has a bed, a stove, and a sink, and it was all sold new this way by Volkswagen at VW dealerships in the 90s. In a way, this was a VanLife vehicle before the VanLife movement became big again a few years ago. And today I'm going to review this EuroVan camper and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news, this EuroVan camper is currently for sale and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. This EuroVan has been in the same family since new here in California. It has a V6 and it's being offered on Cars and Bids with no reserve. So once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this EuroVan, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. All right, time for the quirks and features of the EuroVan, starting with a little history. Volkswagen is famous for their vans, their camper vans specifically, like the old bus in the 1960s, the Vanagon that came later. But by the 80s and 90s, minivans had started to take off, and those vans you slept in and camped in, they weren't as popular as they once were. So Volkswagen decided in the early 90s to try and enter the American minivan segment with a vehicle called the EuroVan. Now, it was called the Transporter in Europe, but for some reason the EuroVan in the States, I guess because it was intended to be a European take on the minivan with sort of different dimensions and a 5-cylinder engine, but it was not at all popular. Mainly because the minivans in America were really geared toward American tastes. They had more power, they had more equipment, they cost less than this European rival, and so within a short time, Volkswagen canceled the EuroVan as a minivan in the States after coming out in the early 90s. Now, in 99, they decided to try again and bring the EuroVan minivan back for a few more years, but they skipped most of the 90s. However, I mentioned earlier that this is a 97. So what's the deal there? Well, even though Volkswagen had stopped selling a minivan version of the EuroVan, they did sell a camper all throughout the 1990s in various versions. There was a Westphalia, which was sort of a partial camper. There was the Winnebago with a pop top and beds inside. And there was even an actual kind of motorhome based on the EuroVan with a stretched length and more typical RV equipment. These were all sold through Volkswagen dealerships. Even though the regular minivan was gone, these RV versions were available, including, yes, this Winnebago model. Volkswagen and Winnebago worked together to create the EuroVan Winnebago camper. You went to a VW dealer, you bought it new, and then you could get off the grid. So what's inside? What do you get when you cross a Volkswagen and a Winnebago? Well, when you open the door, probably the first thing you notice is that the front passenger seat is flipped around. And that's because it swivels. It's actually a pretty cool feature. You can move it around. You press this lever and then it goes from its normal position. You swivel it all the way around so it faces back. And that way, when you get to your destination, you're going camping, an RV park, whatever, you can twist this seat around and hang out with the other people sitting inside the van, or when you're on the road, twist it back and you're going forward, which is pretty cool. Also cool in here is the tables. You look inside and you can see this van has an actual table mounted in here. There's actually two of them. I've got one of them removed to make it easier to move around, but there are two tables in here that combine to make a pretty large table that you could use for eating food or playing board games or whatever you might want while you're stopped at your RV park. And you can see the tables clip into this kind of well-designed little channel over on the side of the van so they don't roll around or fly off, and you can even keep them in place while you're driving. And here's the cool thing, it's it's not just the passenger seat that swivels. The driver's seat will also swivel all the way around, and then you have seating on both sides, both in the front and in the back of this area, so you can hang out and chat or whatever when you're stopped. That's pretty cool. And of course, there's a lot more. For example, this is the toilet. You open up and you can see, yes, it is indeed a toilet. Now, it's not fixed in place. This is a toilet that you can move around. So if people are hanging out inside the van and you want to use the toilet, you can pick it up and take it like out into the woods or elsewhere in the campsite and actually use it. And when you want to empty it, there's not like a traditional flusher like a toilet in your house. You just hook it up to a gray water tank, sort of wastewater, and the van will kind of store the wastewater until you're ready to dump it, which a lot of RV parks have the ability for you to do that. So there's your toilet. There's a lot more too. You have behind the toilet a refrigerator, so you can of course keep your food cold. Obviously a nice feature. Of course everyone knows what that does. And this van also gave you a significant amount of cabinet space. You can see upper cabinet storage and lower cabinet storage, a bunch of different drawers and storage compartments here for all of your cooking equipment. And that comes in handy because this van also includes a sink and a stove. You open up this countertop. This piece stays in place when you're driving, but when you're parked, you lift it up and you can see the sink and the stove. And when you hook the van up to the right stuff, you can use both the sink from a water tank included in the van that you have to fill, and the stove. You can hook the van up to liquid propane gas and get a burner going so you can actually cook something in here, which is also a nice feature that you would want while you're camping in your Volkswagen van. Now, while those are some of the big things that you find in here, the refrigerator, the sink, the stove, the tables, there's also a lot of other nice household conveniences in this van that you would expect to find inside, well, a house. For example, there are window screens, so you can open up the windows while you're parked and keep out bugs. You can go into the forest and have a nice time with a nice cross breeze and the bugs don't get inside. There's also curtains. Now, they don't really work all that well. After 30 years, these curtains kind of fall apart, but you can imagine how it would have been to have window screens and curtains back in the day, just like you might have in your home. There's also a household thermostat, as you can see, mounted here kind of in the middle, and it's just like the one you have at home. You set the temperature, and I guess it blows the air inside the van until it reaches that temperature, which is of course nice to have. Then there's the power outlets. You can see mounted back here 2 different household outlets, obviously important for charging up devices or equipment when you're inside the car. Now, these days we take for granted having a lot of power outlets all through a vehicle, but back in the 90s, you didn't see anything except for one cigarette lighter outlet in the front seat. So having rear-mounted household-style power outlets would have been a very unusual feature and a very welcome one in this van. In fact, you even had a light directly above the sink. You can see there's a switch here to turn on this light so that you could see a little bit better when you're cleaning your dishes after a nice meal, sitting around your table with your swiveling chairs and your refrigerator in your Volkswagen van. But to me, the real party trick of this van is you don't just hang out in here and cook food and use the toilet. You can also sleep in this van. In fact, a lot of people can sleep in this van. Let's start with the rear bed. That's bed 1 of 2. Right now you can see it's a seat, the back seat, and you have seat belts back there so people can sit in a normal seating position while you're driving along. But you can fold this seat down completely flat, as you can see here. And once you've done that, it sort of connects with this platform in the cargo area and these mattress cushions to create an actually fairly large bed in the back of this vehicle. So you have a decent sized bed in back, and it's not just a bed where you sleep. You of course have those windows with screens and curtains, and there's also outlets mounted right next to the bed so you can plug in your devices, charge your phone while you sleep. That's pretty cool. And there's even reading lights mounted on the ceiling where you turn them on and you can specifically adjust them many different degrees, kind of side to side, in order to maximize your reading lamp illumination so you can read a little bit before bed sleeping in your van. And it's even more impressive than that, because directly next to the rear bed in this van, you can see this large storage compartment. It's a closet. equipped with sliding closet doors like you would have in your home. You slide them open and you can see there are hangers hung in there where you can hang your clothes in your closet next to your bed inside your Volkswagen van. This is a pretty impressive thing to just be able to go buy from a VW dealer. And there's one more pretty cool party trick in the back of this van, which is there's a shower back here. You can see a handheld shower head in back that you can use. Again, draws water from the van's freshwater tank. And there's even little cubbies next to the shower where you can store your shampoo, your soap, whatever you might want while you're showering, which is a pretty neat idea and obviously adds to your van convenience. Now, if you're not familiar with these vans, you might be thinking, okay, you showed me bed number 1. How could there possibly be a second bed in here? And the answer is, it's above me. You can see right now the van, well, it has a roof. It looks fairly typical, but it's a little raised up. And that's because the roof is actually a pop-up tent camper situation. There's a couple of latches inside, you release them, and then you push up and pop up the tent. Now, you can see I can't fully pop up the tent in this space. It kind of hits the ceiling, but it gives you a perfect idea of what goes on up here. There is a bed with a cushion, a mattress pad basically, in the back side of this pop-up area, basically above the entire van compartment in the back, and you can sleep there. And it's even cooler than that because there are zippered windows up in the pop-up part of this van, and the windows have screens. So you can unzipper them, get them open, and you have screens on all sides so you can be up in your van pop-up tent and actually kind of be hanging out, looking at nature, whatever's around you, watching a sunrise from the top of your van, which is a pretty cool idea. So one bed down here, another bed above. In theory, you could sleep 4 people in this van, maybe even more if they were willing to get really tight. That is pretty cool and adds to the sort of van life capabilities that the EuroVan has. Now, camper people watching this video will maybe laugh at me a little bit for geeking out on all of this stuff this van has, the refrigerator, the stove, the beds, because a lot of this stuff is included in a lot of campers. It's not really all that unusual. But to me, there are 2 especially cool parts to this van. Number 1, you could buy it all from a dealer. So many of these vans, these Sprinters, you have to buy the Sprinter and then send it off to be outfitted somewhere. This was sold new from Volkswagen Winnebago back in the day. The other cool thing here is the size of packaging. This van is only 202 inches long, which means it's only 2 inches longer than a Hyundai Palisade. And yet it includes a stove, a refrigerator, 2 beds, a sink, a shower, a toilet. That's a lot of stuff to pack into a pretty small size. And I think that that's the primary reason that these EuroVan campers are still so desired in the van life camping world. You really don't give up anything in terms of sizing compared to a regular normal vehicle. So it's pretty easy to drive around, pretty easy to park, and yet you still get all of the camper stuff that you'd get in a Sprinter that's usually longer, taller, and just a little bit more unwieldy. But anyway, all the RV stuff covered in the back, let's talk through some other quirks, starting in the front seats, where the first thing you'll notice when you climb inside is the tall seating position. I think that's another thing people like about this van. Almost feels like an SUV. You're sitting up really high. It feels like sort of a commanding position, very tall. And the same goes for the gear lever, which is also very tall and just sort of stuck in the floor. There was no attempt to make this stylish or attractive or high quality. It's just sort of a big old lever sticking up out of the floor, and that's what they've done in here. And in fact, that's sort of a theme in the front seat of this van. It's not intended to be cool or quirky or interesting. It's just pretty basic and straightforward. This was largely a cargo van in Europe, where style and coolness in the interior wouldn't have really been that important. Nonetheless, there are some interesting quirks. For example, the climate controls, you can see them here, pretty straightforward, except they have 2 images of the EuroVan in the climate controls, one on the bottom and one on the top. The upper image shows the rear seats, as you can see, and then this dial next to that image allows you to adjust the climate control for the back. The lower image shows the front seat, and that one is the climate control for the front. So it gives you kind of front and rear. Why they don't just print the word front and the word rear, I'm not entirely sure. These diagrams seem like they're a little bit more difficult to figure out, but that's what they've done. Now, another interesting quirk in this van, there are cup holders, although they are clearly an afterthought. You can see they're just kind of stuck on the side of the front seat. You flip this down, you open them, you can get your drinks in there, but it's not really the sturdiest thing to use or the easiest to access. Kind of odd for a road trip vehicle like this. There is, however, a very easily accessible and obviously designed with priority ashtray and cigarette lighter in this van. Right here in the center next to the radio and the climate controls, you have your ashtray and your cigarette lighter, which makes sense. The Germans, they didn't necessarily need to be drinking while they were driving. They definitely needed to have their cigarettes. Also odd is the gear pattern is mounted here on the door for the ashtray. You can see PRND, and then it tells you when you have to put your foot on the brake to shift between the two. Not a usual place to see a gear pattern, but that's what they have. By the way, speaking of patterns, a big shout out to the cloth seat pattern on the front seats. I absolutely love this. Very 90s, these sort of geometric shapes with purples and greens. It's exactly what I'd expect in a 90s vehicle, and it does bring a little bit of fun and excitement to this otherwise pretty straightforward and basic interior. And indeed, that really is kind of the only fun you're having up here. There's not a lot of other excitement or coolness. There is an incredibly annoying warning chime if you turn on the van and don't put on your seatbelt. Take a listen. It really is annoying, and it just keeps going. But other than that, the van is a pretty basic, pretty straightforward place to be, again, owing to its roots as a commercial cargo vehicle in Europe. And finally, you might be wondering, what's under the hood of the EuroVan? Well, when it first came to the States, Volkswagen installed in the minivan version of the EuroVan with just regular passenger seating, they put in a 5-cylinder engine that made only 110 horsepower. Now, this was acceptable maybe in Europe, where driving distances tend to be shorter, cities smaller, speed is not as important of a thing as it is in the States. But 110 horses in a minivan just wasn't cutting it. And there's a lot of speculation that that was why this van was not very popular as a minivan when it first came out. When they started making campers, amazingly, they kept that powertrain for the first few years. So even with all this stuff in the back, it was still powered by a 110 horsepower 5-cylinder engine. Thankfully, for 97, and this van is a 97, they ditched the 5-cylinder and installed a V6. And you can see it in here. Now, this boosted power from 110 horses to 140. Still not exactly a huge number, but it was reasonable for the 90s, especially in vans. Back then, the Honda Odyssey also had 140 horsepower, and Chrysler offered 3 different powertrains in its minivans. The most powerful was about 165 horses. So 140 horsepower, not exactly enough to make this exciting or fast, but that wasn't really the point, and it was pretty standard for vans back then. It was enough to move the EuroVan around. One other thing I like in the hood powertrain situation, when you pull the latch on the driver's footwell to release the hood, a little red arrow pops out pointing in. And that's because you're supposed to push this arrow in the direction of the arrow, push it in, and that opens up the hood. It's actually sort of a functional little piece that tells you how to open the hood and get into the engine bay. I love that. You actually had a similar thing in back, the cargo area, the tailgate. You can see there's a little arrow pointing to exactly where the latch is to open the tailgate in back, so that you knew exactly where to stick your hand in order to open up the tailgate and get into the cargo area. Both those things, kind of an interesting idea. Anyway, those are your quirks and features of the EuroVan camper. Now I am very eager to get this out on the road and see how it drives. An old school Volkswagen van camper thing. Let's get behind the wheel. All right, driving the EuroVan Winnebago. I haven't been in a EuroVan in years. First thing I notice about this van is that the powertrain is surprisingly potent. It's got like a decent amount of power. And I say that's surprising because when you look at the numbers, it's pretty disappointing. But I remember the early vans had this 5-cylinder engine that just got reamed in the automotive press for being way too low power. Well, then they put in a V6. It didn't improve power that much, but it's actually fine. It's like, it's not going to win any speed awards, but it's like totally normal and totally fine to drive around. It was like acceptable. And it would have been even more acceptable back in, you know, 97. One thing about this van and all vehicles like this, when you go around, it just rattles from everywhere because there's stuff back there. I mean, there's a table back there and curtains and a bed and, you know, stuff that should not be, that isn't intended to be like, you know, kept in place in a lot of vehicles. I don't necessarily think that's because this van is getting old or is poorly worn or whatever. I have a suspicion it was pretty rattly even in period. And also we have the table out, which maybe isn't the best thing. But I just have a feeling that this, that's just sort of the reality of life with one of these, just because it's such a big, empty, open space with a lot of stuff back there that can rattle around. In terms of driving experience, I'm not at all surprised to note and discover that the steering, it's just big. It's actually, it has sort of a bus-like steering position. You're sitting on top of the steering wheel rather than sort of in front of it. You're sort of steering down over it, which is true in a lot of buses. It doesn't really go around corners particularly quickly. It feels more stable than I was expecting on the road, considering its size and the fact that you could live in it. It doesn't have like as much like floatiness or body roll or uncertainty about where it is. Maybe that's sort of some of the Volkswagen Germanness coming into this car. It feels a little more stable than I was thinking it might. In fact, it drives pretty well. You get past the rattling in the back and it actually drives pretty well. It drives straight, the powertrain works, and it really doesn't feel as big as it is. I'm surprised by this because I thought this would be a gargantuan vehicle with a lot of effort to use it, and it really doesn't seem like that. Okay, now I'm going up a pretty steep hill. It downshifts, again, not fast, but climbing speed and doing it at a reasonable clip. It's a smooth powertrain. I always loved that about the Volkswagen VR6, they called it. It's a nice, smooth engine, and that's true in this car too. It feels smooth, it feels surprisingly okay. Overall though, the truth is when you get a vehicle like this, driving experience is not that big of a deal in terms of enjoyment or enthusiasm. The thing that most people are thinking about when they're thinking about buying a big vehicle like this, a big kind of RV type vehicle, is mainly, is this gonna be usable enough that I can drive it around, you know, on a long road trip without having to deal with like penalties in terms of it's so unwieldy that it doesn't fit anywhere, it doesn't go. And this is definitely usable enough for that. Like I would feel totally comfortable getting it out on the road and taking it on a long trip, assuming that I felt that it was reliable enough. I mean, honestly, it's a 30-year-old Volkswagen. Like, is it gonna hold up? That I don't know. It seems like it's in pretty good shape. No warning lights on in the dash. Suspension feels pretty good, which is usually a leading indicator to me whether a car's been well kept. But I do feel though, like if you're looking for sort of a compact van that you can park at home and yet still take on a road trip wherever, I think this is actually a pretty good vehicle for that, even all these years later. And I think that that's one of the reasons why these EuroVans continue to pull pretty good money, is that, you know, in today's world, if you want to get this, you have to get a Sprinter, a long wheelbase, a high roof Sprinter. That's a big vehicle. It is kind of unwieldy. This van was a lot more fuel efficient. It was a lot more like you could put it in front of your house and people wouldn't be like, my neighbor has an RV. You know, like this is actually a pretty acceptable thing. And I think it's like a pretty reasonable driving experience, even for people who aren't used to like piloting a large van. And I think that's really a benefit of this car. You could be a van lifer without having to, you know, learn how to drive a commercial vehicle essentially. And so not the most fun, not the most engaging, not the fastest, but relatively tight driving experience that a regular person would be used to having. And so that's the 1997 Volkswagen EuroVan camper. This is cool with all the stuff that you would need to live inside, off the grid, or on a major road trip, all straight from Volkswagen and Winnebago when it was new. And you can buy this EuroVan camper on Cars and Bids. Anyway, now it's time to give this van a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 42 out of 100, which puts the EuroVan here against some sort of similar vehicles. It doesn't score all that well, but then the DougScore isn't really set up for this. It's intended to reward sporty, fun cars, not vehicles you can live in. Overall, the EuroVan has a lot of nice charm, and it's an impressively packaged camper in a reasonably sized van body. And it's no wonder why these remain so popular today.